Okay, so this topic is going to be about Gemba Gemba. Um, Take it
So
away, Chris.
what is the Gemba, mate?
To me, there's many different ways you can define Gemba, and there's probably a more correct way to do it. But to me, it's a Japanese word, basically, where that is the place where the work happens.
So a Gemba could be as simple as the seat I'm sitting on now, or it could be as vast as the West Australian Pilbara might be.
It could be. If you wanted to get more specific, I'd be like the place where the value-added work happens. So, for example, the seat I'm sitting in doesn't always necessarily result in value-added work. Um, so maybe, you know, it depends what is produced and how much waste is in it, as you know, as to what that is. I like if I was going to go to the Gemba at a a big mining company over the water here, I wouldn't go to the top floor, to the corporate office as the Gemba. I would fly to the Pilbara where, you know, the iron ore is dug out of the ground. That would be going to the Gemba.
And I did have a client who reminded me that that type of Gemba behaviour is actually, from another people's perspective, waste. The seagulls coming in and pooing over everything and then flying back out again. But I do agree with you, mate. The Gemba would be where the value-added work that's
Yes.
key to customers sending us money would be happening. So it does make you wonder. Does make you wonder why so many leaders sit on their bottoms on chairs in offices similar to the dozen or so I can see behind you there, and still think they're contributing value add to the whole.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think, and it kind of ties back into our previous conversations around the email as well, is that it's very easy to get caught in, I suppose, sitting behind the computer as a way to avoid dealing with people. People are difficult. They can be great one day and horrible the next. They have emotions and needs and feelings, and you know, they have hang-ups that are due to previous experience that prevent them from, you know, doing their best or being able to be their best. And for a leader, you know, they leaders don't always get to be leaders because they were awesome natural leaders. They kind of learn how to be good leaders with a little bit of natural talent, I think. And quite often leaders get to where they were because they have great technical ability, and technical ability does not equal emotional intelligence. And emotional intelligence, if you're struggling to connect with people or can't connect with people, going to the Gemba is really not something that you can be comfortable with, because you're afraid of finding things that aren't right and having to have awkward discussions that could be construed as coming down too hard on people, or being that person who's always pointing out the bad stuff.
Well, I had a leader once who taught me the power of the Gemba through safety. And if you're looking for that common language that a lot of businesses seem to have, a lot of businesses seem to talk about safety and leadership in the field. And he called me the bearded one in those days, as I had a beard. But he pointed out, "Oh, bearded one, how many mouths do you have, mate?" And I said, "One." And then, "How many ears do you have?" "Well, I've got two. One of them is a bit defective, but I still have two." And he said, "Well, you know, time in the workplace can be structured, time in the workplace can be unstructured. But if you have too much structure, how can you listen to what the Gemba is telling you? Because you have that agenda that stops you from listening." So making sure that you have some structured time to be out there having frank and open discussions about health and safety, and then some unstructured discussions to listen to what the Gemba is telling you. Those
Yeah.
pesky humans don't have and-on, mate. There isn't a little flashing light that tells me that they're defective.
Well, it also doesn't tell you that they're thinking this is not going how I'd like it to go, or you know, or they might be struggling with something, or that they could just really use your support. And it could be, you know, are they having a problem with something at work? Is it the task at hand that's an issue? Are they having issues at home? All of that kind of thing. So you got no way of knowing unless you go out there and proactively, you know, build rapport with your people and spend time with them. That's when they open up. And look, I think some leaders get very a bit avoidant of the whole concept, because there's always someone who's, you know, got a bit of a chip on their shoulder. And look, there's reasons for that. There's probably past problems or issues that they had to deal with that haven't made them great at, or made them too self-aware of their hang-ups or their chips. And leaders don't feel comfortable talking to those people, because they quite often they point out some truths, but then it gets mixed in with a lot of victim mentality as well. And nobody knows how to deal with the victim mentality, and they're afraid, particularly in big corporate environment. I think that there's a fear that if you call someone out on maybe, you know, having a bit of a victim mentality, that you could be in trouble for harassment or bullying. And it's tricky. But again, if you're a leader with really good emotional intelligence, you can navigate that stuff.
Yes, I've had the privilege, perhaps not having an innate emotional intelligence, but some of the big corporates over my career invested ludicrous amounts of money trying to turn me into a good leader. So I've learnt what the coping mechanisms are if you think you're going to walk into a entrapping conversation. And I did notice recently the old Harvard Business Review article about the monkey on your back. Have you ever come across that before?
Not in a business sense.
Well, no, delegating upwards is sometimes one of the responses of a victim mentality. It's, no, I can't deal with that, but you're the boss and your job is to remove the roadblocks that stop me from being awesome, is the crudest role of a leader. And the questions that they suggested to us were pretty simple. You know, well, what's the problem? And then once they tell you the problem, you know, why is that causing us a problem? You know, how does that become a problem for us? Just talk me through how you see it. And then, what do you think we could do about it? What options do we have? And then, well, you know, that's a great idea. How about we give that a go? And when you see me at somewhere between 10 and 12 tomorrow, pull me aside, tell me how it goes.
Yeah, absolutely. I think those whole, you know, that's along the theme of what do you think is really asking, you know, the people who do their work. That's the whole point of being out in the Gemba as well, is like the best ideas, the incremental improvement, the behavioural change is what happens out in the Gemba. And if you are a leader who actually works on trying to encourage that, you won't fix it this week, and you won't fix victim mentality next week or the next month. But over a year of consistency, you can fix it and you can change it. People are like, quite often when they've been in a bad work environment, or they're in a self-fulfilling victim mentality environment where there's even a group of victims all making the same claims, they quite often get really deep in the, you know, I'm being, you know, put down by the bosses, and, you know, we're just forgotten about over here, and, you know, that kind of thing. And it takes a long time to dig them out of that. It takes a long time. But to be honest with you, it's usually only because of maybe one or two people who are really burnt out, or really had some bad experiences in their previous life, that are really creating that toxicity in that team. For the most part, the team will just follow along quite happily. And usually the people who just aren't that mindset, they usually just keep their head down, shut up, and do their job off to the side and don't get involved. They're there, you know.
Well, and you talk to an emerging pattern that worries me about the workforce, especially in the great state of Western Australia. But the budget in New Zealand, there was echoes of the same problem emerging. When the labour market gets tight, time and role for leaders becomes shorter and shorter. And the ability for that leader and that team member to build an effective rapport, well, if you are going to be gone in 90 days, why should I bother investing my time in you as a leader? I'll invest my time in the next leader who may hang around for a bit longer.
Yeah, that's an interesting. There's a very short-term mindset, and a lot of big companies here in WA in the mining sector have created a rod for their own back, where they're highly encouraging their up-and-comers, their talented people, to actually seek the next role and the next role. And they really only encourage them to be in a role, whether it's policy or not, it's about 18 months. And 18 months is really not that long. It's kind of 6 months to really understand what's going on, 12 months to maybe, implement one business cycle of changes. It's not enough time to really steer, change the direction of a department or what have you. My personal feeling, and just from what I've seen through really capable organisations internationally, is that 5 years is really what it should be. So my feeling is it should be about 3 years of getting that to happen. So 6 months to get your head around what's going on, another 2.5 years to really make differences and change the way the place is operating and get the right mindsets and behaviours going. And then the 2 years at the end is really where you as a leader think about what's your next step and work towards, your next career step, if that's what you want to do. But 5 years gives you, a bit of flex in there. And you may move at 3-ish years, but you may move around 5 years. But I think if leaders actually had the chance to just slow down and create some real value where they are, then that 3 to 5 year kind of window is much, much better. And ultimately it starts with, getting out to the Gemba, like connecting with people.
And, on an upswing commodity market, as you're experiencing over there, with short-term engagements, and I'll exaggerate, 18 weeks between changeovers is a potential as much as 18 months for those high potential. They're just riding the upswing. They're taking credit for random variation or exogenous factors. And
yes.
We end up with a bunch of leaders who are unwilling or unable to manage actual problems when the and-on light comes on and says, hey, look, the commodity price is going down, not up, mate. What are you going to do with all those stranded costs now?
Yeah, and so in the last mining boom, which kind of, finished up around 2015, I know anecdotally of several people who were made redundant at that point. They got into leadership positions because they rode that upswing. They didn't have the experience. Some of them had the qualifications, others definitely didn't have the qualifications, but ultimately, beyond the qualifications, it was their experience and ability to bring something to the table as a leader, to bring different perspectives, to harness the best teams, was their undoing as well. And they themselves were a victim of this short-term mentality, and they had very short-term gains, promotion upon promotion very quickly, redundancy. But I think in the longer term, it doesn't see them well. And things like a redundancy, realistically, it's only there to see through to the next appointment, but very likely people don't get an appointment as high as they were coming off the back of a boom.
So I think I'm badly paraphrasing someone talking about the honesty of the Gemba, or the honesty you find in the Gemba. A rising tide floats all boats. It's when the tide goes down, you find out who's naked.
Yeah, and the analogy I have of that is around waste as well. Just to sort of link that back is that, you know, a river that's very high flows smoothly, and you don't see the waste. But when the water level comes down, which is the whole point of like a one piece flow principle as well, and it's the same thing as when there's lean times and the river comes down, the rocks are exposed, and the rocks put holes in the boats. You know, it's only the best who survive.
Now, you know, I read what happens in Western Australia. You do get to hear about foreign countries over here. And I do note that a lot of the big miners are doing stuff that sounds very counterintuitive when it comes to waste. They're building out capacity on an upswing market where your input costs are going up and your labour costs are going up and this and that's going up. They become very sticky, so we chuck a few rocks into the river while it's flying swiftly and then act really surprised when the water level comes down 4 litres later. Who the hell put that rock there, mate?
Yeah, I kind of feel like right now, probably in about 2 years' time, there's going to be a large reckoning in terms of the amount of cost that's appeared in the business of a lot of these big miners, and they will go through some pretty savage cutbacks. It's only going to take, you know, the world eventually getting over, you know, COVID constraints within, say, Brazil for iron ore to improve there. If there's some way to, you know, improve iron ore supply or create iron ore supply out of Africa, which is not a known yet, then that's going to increase the amount of the commodity. On top of that as well, you know, the demand is being driven by export out of Australia. Eventually, you know, the overseas markets will trim down and slow up a bit. They're not going to indefinitely be building skyscrapers in other countries. Those other countries need to pull themselves out of, you know, near recession from the pandemic as well. So they're doing that for the next couple of years. But then they will ease up on it a bit, and I think that will have a big change in the commodity price. And of course, out of that is going to get realised that a lot of these big infrastructure projects that have happened in the recent few years are suddenly going to not be as attractive as they were.
And you know, it's not just iron ore that's a commodity, mate. That tourism, as an example over here, has exactly the same symptom, that all the costs have been baked in during the upswing and now we're naked. But you did say something about the Gemba that scared me a bit, mate. That if the last downturn was 2015 and the next one, you know, best guess, maybe 2023-ish, we've gone 8 years with leaders changing over every 12 to 18 months, so 4 or 5 generations of leaders who have never had a discussion with their team in the Gemba about what we can do about input costs.
Yeah, and no burning platform too, right? So they don't have the experience of seeing that before. You know, in the last, so this is going back a while actually. I do remember an acquaintance of mine who was an engineer had finished and graduated from university a bit before the FC, and although, you know, it was a bit of a blip on the radar in terms of, you know, economy and things, it did have some impact. The GFC did have some impact here at the time, and that engineer was really out of permanent work, or where they thought they would be, for about 2 years. They had their first year out of university as a graduate was very bright and looking good. GFC hits. 2 years of more contract work and having periods of unemployment. You know, lots of engineers around, so competition in that market. And it took quite a bit of time to get back on top. You know, if we ever slow down in, you know, a couple of years' time, and we see that happen again. There will be a lot of leaders who don't know how to deal with that situation, and they effectively will have their necks on the chopping block if they can't prove their ability to, identify and eliminate waste in their processes.
Well, I can finish the story perhaps with a story that builds on your tale, and then predict what most business leaders do in their hour of desperation. So the coal industry went through a massive downturn that happened almost like a step change. The coking coal price, the other part of iron ore to make steel, went from nearly $200 a ton down to somewhere around $50 a ton over a 22-week period, and stayed there. And what we discovered in that business was that below the managing director and most of the general managers, not one of the manager layer, the superintendent layer, or the frontline supervisor layer had experienced life during a downturn. So they did what any business does in their time of need. They call in the consultants who carried with them the tribal knowledge through the last swing of how to cut costs effectively but savagely.
Yeah.
So good for you and me, mate. We being 10,000 years old,
we'll be fine. I had a connection as well just before we finish up on this topic around going to the Gemba, and this is going back a bit. When I was a frontline leader, I had strong routines around my Gemba walks. I would run my pre-start and hand out the work in my operation, and then at about 8:30 in the morning, so it's a 12-hour shift, I would then do my Gemba walk, and my first Gemba walk was all safety focused. Compliance for oscillations, JHAs, take fives, all of those kind of things. But I also had a personal commitment discussion with every single person under my control. I had 15 people at the time. So that personal commitment on a daily basis at that point at 8:30 was, did you get a good handover? Was it realistic from what we were told before the pre-start from the previous shift? What are you going to achieve today, and are you committed to achieving that? Are there any roadblocks that I need to take from you and fix so that you can achieve your goals? And then I would say, right, I'm coming back at 3:30 and I'm going to check in. And at that time, I would come back at 3:30. I'd have some ad hoc, walk around during the day, but at 3:30 I would do the same thing, and I would touch base with all 15 of my people and make sure they were okay. I had some people who were out in the field, because I had people who were out in the mine pit performing maintenance too. I would call them on the mobile phone and check in with them as well. So 3:30 was my time to see if they had achieved what they committed to, and if not, why not? And could they claw it back by the end of shift? And it also meant that the accuracy of my handover to the next shift was very high. So at a frontline level, that's a very easy routine to do. Not many people did it. But when the chips were down, I knew what my team could and couldn't achieve, and I could provide commitments to my 1-up and 2-up as to what we could and couldn't achieve. And that was very powerful. It meant that my Gemba walks actually eliminated a lot of waste, just because the behaviors and the mindsets of my people was accountability and a strong accountability to try and achieve the goals that we'd set ourselves. The upshot of that, and we come back to the whole, if we talk higher level leaders, etc., and we talk about upswings and downswings in an industry. If you're the leader who does that kind of thing well, regardless of what level you are in the business, and you can drive respectful accountability that way, you are going to come out as someone who survives all seasons. as opposed to someone who's a Johnny come lately and maybe has, rode that wave of boom, but you don't have the capability to survive in the longer term.
So just one last question then. Bloody great story, that one. But did your leader or your manager, once removed, take your operating ritual and say, this is the way that all crews should happen? Or did they just treat you like a bit of a wizard that your crew would come in and sort of mop up the previous disaster and set things out well for the crew that follows?
I think I learnt the discipline from my one up. He had the right mindset. He was of the same mindset. He never put me up on a pedestal per se, but I think that he had that expectation, and that the different frontline leaders on different shifts, we all managed to do it in different ways, or be more effective. But I certainly had probably, I would say, a less experienced crew. So I was a bit more focused on how do I get them to perform consistently. We were definitely the best crew, in my opinion, not because we had the most experienced people, but because we had the most consistency. So some of the other crews could perform quite well, but it was all hinged on a handful of individuals. My crew was the collective. Everybody could perform fairly well. But more importantly, we had a very realistic sense of commitment to timeframes and quality and safety, and what we couldn't achieve. So we pushed ourselves, but we didn't overcommit. And we also didn't just go into anything with no commitment.
Well, it's rare as a leader to get assigned a team of high-performing individuals. Most of us only ever get the well-performing group team members where everybody is average. Only a few of us can be as exceptional as you, mate. The rest of us are average like me. But it's a great point, and it perhaps talks to the different business cultures. You get businesses that have a culture of you're as successful as the team's joint output. Then they go and reward individuals for that rather than rewarding the team.